Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. We're going to take a look at the president of the nation, that's President Buhari, who has, of course, signed into law the Nigeria Startup Bill, which is now the Nigeria Startup Act, which is, of course, supposed to be assisting the ecosystem, which is about, and it's supposed to look at 10 billion naira in seed funding that is supposed to be applied to that particular, to the startups that are going to be benefiting from this particular act. So what does this mean for investment within the startup ecosystem? Joining me to shed some more light, Ugo Aliogo, who is a public policy analyst, and Gulbet Kiros, who is a late-stage investor and co-founder of Bezi. Thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. So the startups, and I guess we'll find out what does Bezi do, and I guess we'll now use that to eat into how this works for the act.
Fantastic. So what Bezi essentially tries to do is we're building a community for top-tier founders. One of our theses is in order for us to generate companies like Flutterwave, it's very important for African founders to build a network pan-Africa. The mission of Bezi is to link up these top-tier founders with top operators. So there's a question of fundraising, but the next stage is how do you build a successful company that will allow you to scale and attract essentially additional funding in order for companies to reach the unicorn valuation and see some of the success you've seen in LATAM, Southeast Asia. It's very important for them to be able to do cross-border transactions. And part of that is linking them with folks who've done it before. So folks from Ceylanland, Flutterwave, GB's one of the mentors, and a few other folks that we've reached out to essentially teach the new generation how to best scale.
Great stuff. All right, and Ugo, you're coming from this from a public policy angle, yes? As far as your stake in this is how policy is supposed to put all these type of things together.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's start with the bill now. Is this a magic bullet? What's your take on what's been signed?
I think it's a fantastic, great opportunity. I wouldn't say it's a silver bullet in the sense that it's a fix-all, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. I'm particularly excited about the framework in which a lot of the startups have access to the regulators and harmonizing a lot of the issues that in recent past have created issues. So creating a framework in which startups and regulators are able to interact is fantastic. Also, the incentives are much needed. It will definitely promote investment. And finally, even the provisions to work with accelerators, incubators, that also hopefully will benefit folks like us that are trying to promote investment in this space.
Great stuff. So Ugo, from your end, how are you seeing the bill? Or act now?
Okay, the act. I think it's very beautiful in itself. First, it talks about the need to build a regulatory framework and then set the operational guidelines. So the act would help in a long way to position Nigerian tech startups to become and make Nigeria a leading player in digital technology across Africa and then be one of the leading players internationally. So, and then the bill would help to provide some sort of support and then help to regulate the sector. This is a growing sector, right? So it helps to give them that presence, it helps to give them that structure, and then it helps to give them that needed foundation. Remember, they operate in clusters, right? Now they'll be more organized. Now there's a law, right? A regulatory framework backing what they are doing and backing the tech startup, which is fundamental to their growth, which is fundamental to their survival. And then it will help to protect the sector against infiltration by quacks. So there are regulations, there are guidelines, the operational guidelines and standards. So it appreciates the good of the tech startup and then what they are doing in Nigeria.
Great stuff. As far as what you look for before investing in firms in the ecosystem, what are those conditions, and can you marry that with what you've seen in this act?
So, because we work closely with a lot of VCs, also when making personal investments, for us it's the fundamentals. It always goes down to the people, the market, and the M&A or the exit opportunity. That being said, we take that consideration with the macro environment. So obviously government regulation or restrictions is a big consideration. As you know, the FX restriction, for example, will dump in the excitement maybe for coming until you see how you can potentially take out profits as you're supporting investments. That being said, I think me and I think the people we work with, we're very excited about what's coming in the pipeline. I think the macro environment does sound a bit difficult given some of the challenges, but there's still great people trying to solve great problems. And what we want to do is make sure we build an ecosystem around them. And the passage of this bill for us creates some clarity.
Okay.
One of the biggest things investors hate is uncertainty. And it does create a very clear roadmap as to how to deal with regulators, what the tax incentives are, and also the framework in which the voice of this ecosystem could be heard, which wasn't there before. So especially when certain regulations kind of came down the pipeline, I'm sure in recent history you've heard things with SEC interfering with certain companies or the CBN interjecting and others. That shock hopefully will be removed by leveraging this ecosystem, this legislation.
Fantastic. Ugo, can you talk about how this came together? Was a collaboration between the government and the private sector. Can you talk about the importance of that collaboration from when this began? Just basically, I just want you to, as a public policy person, to talk about the importance of dialogue with the private sector to get acts like this to become reality.
So across the world, development of technology startups, right, requires angel investors. It requires venture capitalists. And these angel investors and venture capitalists are private sector partners. So in modern day economies, you can't drive growth, right, without the private sector. So the collaboration between government and private sector is very important and it's very vital for the survival of tech startups. So it's very beautiful collaboration in itself. And then I hope that continues. And then I hope that with this startup bill, it has been able to repose a lot of confidence on angel investors and private sector partners that would want to invest in the Nigerian startup market, because there's a bill that creates the legal framework and the legal backing to say that, look, the Nigerian startup industry, there's a roadmap, there is a way forward, it has a legal backing, is positioned to drive growth, and then government is backing it. So, I mean, it's a very good synergy and a lot is going to come out of it. And then those who are wishing to invest will invest, especially private sector partners, because there's a legal framework. There's a bill. So government is in full support. Unlike before, where the technology startups were working in isolation. They were being funded by angel investors. They were being funded through bootstrapping and self-funding, and then through crowdfunding. But now we'll now have the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Fund, which is the federal government bank, right, that would drive funding, give microcredit, and then give a financial intervention. So there's a lot that government has put in place through this law, and then private sector coming in means that the collaboration will be very effective.
Okay, great stuff. Good, but let me come back to you. Is funding the number one metric that tech startups need? I mean, we know about policy, and that's definitely there, but outside of, I guess, the other pathways that a startup needs to get to where it needs to in terms of scale and so on, is funding number one, or are there any other metrics that need to be ticked off?
I think funding is a major resource that's needed, but more than funding, believe it or not, what we're seeing is people. Okay. So one of the biggest challenge right now for most of the companies we work with is actually attracting and retaining staff. So given the recent phenomena as they've it's been one of the biggest challenges for most startups because the best asset in any organization is its people.
Right.
People drive the growth, people help you scale. And one of the things that's happening on a global level is also talent now is global. You're no longer, Nigerian programmers or developers are no longer, quote unquote, just Nigerian developers. They are able to get top dollars. And in certain instances, they're able to migrate, which creates a lot of challenges for companies we've been working with. So more than funding for us is attracting and retaining, and the funding is a function of growth. So, more than if you have the right customers, you're growing, money will follow to keep fueling that growth. But aside from, money, people goes back to just government interference or lack thereof it. So the more clarity there is, I think, as my colleague mentioned here, it's very important to have a framework that all of us know what the rule of the game is.
Yeah.
We have confidence that it won't change. There won't be exogenous shock that will come and unimpede, whatever you've planned. So we're kind of excited about those type of frameworks, but I would still circle back and say we have to find a way to attract and retain folks. Otherwise, it's becoming quite a challenge to build a company as you have folks leaving after 6 months.
All right, I think we need to talk about education and skills after the break. So we'll take a quick break. Gulbert and Ugo are still with us. It is Business Week on Arise News. We'll be right back. Just stay tuned. Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. We still have Gulbet Kiros, who's the early-stage investor and co-founder of Bezi. We've got Ugo Aliogo as well, public policy analyst. We're talking about Nigeria's tech ecosystem. We're talking about this landmark startup act that has been signed into law by President Buhari. So when we fought the break, Gulbert, you were talking about skills. You were talking about to retain tech talent in Nigeria and trying to keep them from leaving. So Ugo, let me now come to you. The talent pool in Nigeria, as far as maybe from an education standpoint or education policy or focus on education, so that we have a pipeline that feeds into this tech ecosystem. How do we build that? How do we improve that? ASU, I mean, you have to, you can't help but mention ASU. They've been on strike for 8 months. They've just come back. So, all these things, everything ties together. So talk about education, and this pipeline to tech.
Okay. So I've been on this show with you severally.
You have. Well, on Global Business Report, not this show, but yeah, okay.
Global Business Report.
Yeah.
And then there have been several times I've talked about the need for us to design a roadmap where we want to develop our nation. Tech is the new oil.
Yep.
Is the new way to go.
Yeah.
Right? If we decide to develop our economy along tech. There's something called Silicon Valley. It's a hub in America.
Of course.
For the tech startups in America. India is one of the leading tech startups in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Nigeria can be a tech leader in Africa.
Okay.
Now that we have African continental free trade, we can present that as an area we have comparative advantage. But those are things that we need to put into consideration. How do you solve this problem? Let's go back to our universities.
All right.
Let's build a curriculum, right, along those lines.
That is reflective of
reflective,
today,
right? What is our curriculum structure? It's still recycled knowledge. We need to build our curriculum to reflect the talent we want. What is industry requirements? What does the market need?
Yeah.
And then I want to employ graduates from University of Benin or from University of Lagos. What knowledge do they want? What are the talents? What talent do they want? What's the requirements?
Yeah.
So we need to fine-tune our curriculum to meet industry requirements so that our graduates will come out ready for market ready. Right? So that we don't have conversations that our graduates are not employable.
Yeah.
Because of the curriculum, because of what our universities have been designed to give.
Yeah.
But if you design a curriculum that meets industry requirements, that meets market standards, we'll have graduates who are ready for the market.
Okay.
Right? So that would now help you to churn out graduates who are market ready. So even if you have people who are leaving because they want to go for greener pastures in other developed economies, we'll now have a pool of graduates who are market ready to fit into some of these tech startups.
Perfect.
And then not just fit in, they can also build their own.
Okay, all right, good stuff. Gulbert, one of the reasons why folks leave for greener pastures, as Ugo has talked about, I guess is not just looking for a better, compensation comes into play now. And I'm thinking when these tech companies make pitches to you, or when you review them, I assume you review what it is that they're paying in staff. Is Nigeria competitive as far as the tech ecosystem in terms of compensation compared to other climes? And I know there's funding and seed funding and all these things that the bill talks about, but just as a macro view, is Nigeria's tech ecosystem competitive in compensation?
I would say from where we started,
Yeah.
absolutely it's increased. And most of that is market forces. So
Right.
if you want to retain somebody when they have an option to go online and find remote work,
Yeah.
you end up having to pay. That being said, I don't think the overall value proposition is just not compensation. I think there are other challenges that folks might be facing that just might want them, where they feel like they just want to leave because of, it could be security, it could be infrastructure issues, where they somehow feel that being outside of Nigeria might be beneficial to them in terms of also just opening up other opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's not something we've delved too much into other than trying to address it by, okay, how do we keep training the next generation? Because you can't control who leaves. I think what you can focus on is, as a company, what can you do to build the right environment for somebody to feel like they're a stakeholder and make sure they have a clear mission, they feel like they're benefiting from the reward of the company growing. So I think most startups have also created sophisticated compensation scheme now, which includes employee stock option, restricted stocks, and so on and so forth. So folks know early on, for helping build this company, there's a bigger reward on the back end.
Great stuff. Gulbert mentioned infrastructure. So you've talked education. I'm coming back to you again, Ugo, for infrastructure. Yes. The tech ecosystem operates within, I mean, if this table was Nigeria and you've got different sectors, yeah? We've only got a couple minutes to go. Yes. Electricity, internet connectivity, broadband, 5G. How necessary are these to building the tech ecosystem that this bill is addressing?
Very necessary.
Yeah?
Very necessary.
One answer, is that it?
Yeah, it's very necessary.
Okay.
And government now has to look at it that this is an enabler.
Yeah.
Electricity is an enabler to drive the growth of the tech startup in Nigeria. When they are running on independent power plants, right? They are running on power generating sets. It spikes the cost of doing business. And then that now adds to the ease of doing business.
Oh, sorry, when you say independent power plant, you mean your generator
yes,
and
power
so
generating
and
sets,
diesel
yes,
and all
yes,
that? Okay,
power generating sets.
all right.
So what that does is that it now affects their cost of doing business. It has a ripple effect on their expenditures, their running costs.
Yeah.
So I think government should try to factor in the fact that electricity, it's an enabler, and then there is need to fix it.
Right.
Otherwise, having this budget, having this bill, will make it run maybe in isolation.
All right, well, that's why the president announced that Siemens is going to be delivering those mobile substations and transformers by May of next year. So hopefully we get electricity generation improves. Gulbet, let me give you the last word. What's your outlook? Are you optimistic as far as the tech ecosystem for Nigeria? There's a new government coming in, so we hope that there's continuity with this bill. So what's your outlook for Nigeria's tech? And are you in any other African nations, or you're just here?
Yeah, no, we're Pan-African.
Okay,
so we have 45 fellows spread out from Egypt, Kenya, obviously Nigeria is about half the fellows, Ghana, South Africa. So we're pretty spread out. As I said, our thesis is how can we help our fellows or the companies we're supporting scale. I think to kind of hint at the last question you asked, I don't think people should, I think the general macro environment, given the security challenge infrastructure, there's kind of dampers the sour, but the data says otherwise. We've actually raised more money to date than what we raised last year. And that also applies on for the continent itself. Yeah. We hit $4 billion. I think last year we raised about $4.5 billion total.
Dollars, right?
Dollars, yes.
Just to make sure.
And for Nigeria it was about about 800 million. If that came, so about a third of it was
from
Nigeria.
Okay.
So Nigeria is still the big overweight. It's still growing. And to date, we've already surpassed both those numbers. Yeah. More companies have been funded. I think my question, or the way I would frame it, is assuming we address all the other issues, technically, would it have been double or more?
Aha. We'll end it there. On an optimistic note, Gulbet Kiros, who is the early stage investor and co-founder at Bezi, and of course, Ugo Aliogo, public policy analyst. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us to talk about the startup bill and Nigeria's tech ecosystem. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having us.
All right, I'm Rotus Oddiri. You've been watching Business Week. Thank you so much for joining us here on Arise News. We'll see you next week. Take care.